But what about capitalism in practice? Right? How is it done in practice, in reality? Now, first, let me say, and I know the left says exactly the same thing I'm going to say, but I'm going to make the contrast, that there really never has been capitalism as I just defined it. There's never been a complete separation of state from economics. Now, the communists say the same thing, of course. There's never been real capitalism. There's never been real communism. We need to try it next time. It'll work. Next time, we'll get it right. And this is the difference. The difference is that to the extent that you try socialism, certainly to the extent that you try communism, it is, by the standard of human flourishing, an unmitigated disaster. It leads to nothing but death and starvation. Everywhere it's tried. Everywhere it fails. At whatever scale it is tried. Whether it is a scale of a commune, a kibbutz, or a Soviet Union or China, it always fails and leads to death and destruction. Maybe not death on a kibbutz, but destruction, certainly. Capitalism is the opposite. To the extent that capitalism is tried by the standards of human well-being, to that extent it succeeds. To that extent, people are better off. People are wealthier. People have more options. People have more choices. People have more wealth. People thrive. Capitalism is a system that has been dabbled with for 250 years, and everywhere, no matter what place in the world that is tried even a little bit, it has unbelievably good outcomes. In spite of the anti-capitalist propaganda that you hear. I mean, the story of humanity is a story of endless poverty. We look at the history of mankind over the last 100,000 years, what you see is extreme poverty lived by well over 90% of all the population everywhere in the world. So for 100,000 years, basically income and wealth were flat. They didn't alter, they didn't change. Maybe they got a little bit better under Greece and Rome, and then they went down, and they stayed the same pathetic life. How long did people live back then? Anybody know? What's the average life expectancy?
Like 35?
Yeah, it was well under 40, right? And then something miraculous happened. Because at some point, just on a scale of income, wealth, but also life expectancy, suddenly everything went up dramatically, not a little bit, not a little Greece or Rome, but suddenly everything exploded. So that today in France, your income and wealth are well over, on average, well over 300 times what they were 300 years ago. 300 times. But in terms of quality of life, the quality of your life is thousands of times better than it was 300 years ago. How do you value? You can't value monetarily the value of having running water and toilets. How do you value electricity? In economics, we can only measure dollars or francs or euros. But in terms of quality of life, our life is much better than we can measure it in those terms. We have today the kind of wealth that nobody 300 years ago could have even imagined. You live the best lives any human beings have ever lived on this planet. By any standard of wealth, income, your life expectancy is probably over 100. Mine is probably less. Yours is probably well over 100. And if the right scientific breakthroughs happen, it could be a lot over 100. And there's no limit to the wealth, to the success you can have. What happened to lead to this inflection point of exponential growth in every measure of human well-being? What happened? How did we go from, anybody know how many people were in extreme poverty 300 years ago, globally? What percentage of the world population was extremely poor? The UN defines extreme poverty as $2 a day or less. How many people were extremely poor 300 years ago?
Over 95%.
Yeah, over 95%. How many people are extremely poor today? In the world, not in France, but in the world, globally. Anybody know? Guess? It's like an important number, right? 20%. Anybody else? More than that? Less than that? 10%. What's that? Think Africa, think Asia, think the whole world. It's 8%. We went from 90-something, 95% to 8%. 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, it was 30%. In the last 40 years, the greatest advancement human beings have ever seen in terms of the defeat of poverty has happened, and you don't even know about it. We've gone from 30, 40% of poverty, extreme poverty, to 8%. We should be celebrating in the streets, but nobody celebrates. It's a good question as to why.